I sell supplies and stationery, but let me tell you about something that happened about 2 years ago. Back then, I was newly married to my wife, Diana, a happy, energetic woman who brought so much joy into my life. We were building a good life together. Diana's family was quite large, and I always sensed they shared some kind of secret among themselves. One day, her grandmother invited us over for dinner. They lived in an old apartment that seemed to hold as many stories as it did years. Diana's grandmother was a striking woman, commanding attention without trying. After dinner, she wanted to entertain us and led us to a small room I hadn't noticed before. The floor was covered in a handmade carpet adorned with vibrant red flowers. The room itself had a warm, comforting atmosphere. Against one wall stood an ancient closet, painted a faded blue. Grandma opened its door, revealing an unexpectedly deep interior. Inside there was a chest. She pulled it out and took an old photo album from within. Diana, ever curious, peeked inside the chest with growing excitement. Her eyes lit up as she uncovered a small wooden box. She held it up and asked, "What's this, Big Mama?" Her grandmother quickly took the box from Diana's hands and said firmly, "Nothing," as she placed it back into the chest. The box, though simple, was undeniably captivating. Diana wasn't ready to drop the matter. She asked again, "Really, Big Mama, what's in that box?" Grandma avoided the question and instead placed the photo album on the ground. "Come sit down," she said. "Let's look at these photos together." But I couldn't let my curiosity rest. "Grandma," I said, "you've got to tell us. That box is so intriguing. What's inside?" Grandma sighed deeply. "This box," she said, "has been passed down from my mother, who received it from her mother, and so on. After my death, it will go to Diana's mother and then to Diana." Her words sounded like an age-old ritual. "That's complicated," I remarked. "It's not complicated," she replied. "It's tradition, from one generation to the next. But what's most important is that no one in our family has ever opened it, and neither will we. We only pass it on." Diana looked puzzled. "Until when?" Grandma shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "They told us never to open it." "You shouldn't open it either," Grandma warned. "Why?" Diana asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "Don't ask why," Grandma replied firmly. "There is no why." As I listened, I thought to myself, maybe this is the family secret I've always sensed, a box passed down through generations, yet never opened. What could possibly be inside it? Once we got home, I couldn't resist asking Diana about the box. "I don't know either," she admitted with a shrug. "Maybe some old pictures or trinkets." Her casual answer didn't ease my curiosity. Instead, it only made it worse. I couldn't stop thinking about it, the mysterious box that no one dared open. That night, I dreamt about it. In my dream, I opened the box to find it brimming with gold, jewelry, and ancient photographs. A young woman appeared, her face kind and serene, and she thanked me. The next morning, I told Diana about the dream. She laughed, brushing it off. "What's gotten into you about that box?" she teased. Weeks later, during a holiday visit to Grandma's house, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided that I had to see what was inside the box. It wasn't about taking anything. I just needed to satisfy the nagging questions in my mind. At the right moment, when no one was paying attention, I slipped into Grandma's small room. I carefully retrieved the box from its usual place, keeping my movements quiet and deliberate. I carried it to the car, unnoticed. That night, back at home, I couldn't wait any longer. I pretended to sleep, waiting until Diana was fast asleep. Then, I slipped out of bed and took the box to the living room. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, there was a ring, blackened with age, and a piece of yellowed paper. The paper was covered in strange symbols and writing that I couldn't understand. I quickly snapped a picture of the writing and then hid the box away. That night, the same young woman from my dream appeared again. Her soft voice whispered words of gratitude, though I couldn't understand why. The next morning, I sent the picture of the writing to a university friend who was knowledgeable about old languages and symbols. "Can you translate this for me?" I asked him. By evening, my friend called, his voice laced with curiosity. "What is this?" he asked. "It's nothing," I replied casually. "I'm just curious. Did you manage to figure it out?" "I'll send you the translation by tonight," he promised. I had just finished saying goodbye to my friend over the phone when Diana came out of our room. She looked unusually lethargic and asked, "Who were you talking to?" Her tone carried a hint of suspicion that made me uneasy. "A friend from university called," I said. She didn't respond but remained unconvinced. Throughout the day, her demeanor felt off. Every time I checked my phone, she glanced at me, her curiosity clearly piqued. "Who keeps buzzing you?" she asked at one point. "It's nothing," I said quickly, but her doubt was growing. Later, I went out to buy groceries, but when I returned, she asked, "Were you really at the store, or did you go to meet someone?" This wasn't the Diana I knew. Her mood was shifting, becoming uncharacteristically sensitive and tense. I tried to reassure myself. She's just tired, I thought. She'll be fine by nightfall. But the next day, her condition worsened. I still hadn't been able to return the box to its place at Grandma's. Diana had become so watchful that I couldn't leave the house without raising her suspicions. Meanwhile, I was growing increasingly anxious, waiting for my friend to send the translation. That evening, as Diana and I sat watching a movie, the doorbell rang. I got up to answer it. A woman stood there, confused. "I'm sorry," she said. "I must have the wrong floor." I pointed her in the right direction, closed the door, and turned back into the apartment. To my surprise, Diana was standing right behind me. "What's wrong?" I asked. She didn't reply. Instead, she started shouting loud, angry words that I couldn't understand. Her outburst was sudden and jarring. "What's going on?" I pleaded, but she stormed into the hall and sat down, her face a mix of anger and frustration. She shouted for several minutes before finally calming down, falling into a tense silence. For the next 2 hours, she didn't say a word to me. The following day, I received an email from my friend. The translation had finally arrived. Though I wasn't feeling well, my curiosity outweighed my unease. Away from Diana's eyes, I opened the email and started reading. As I read, a cold wave of fear washed over me. The letter revealed the story of a woman who sought revenge on her husband. Her husband's wife had slowly poisoned her, causing her to die a lingering, painful death. In her final moments, the woman exacted her revenge. She killed her husband, dissecting his body piece by piece, and used his blood to write the letter I was now reading. She had then sealed the letter with her blood-stained ring before taking her own life. My hands trembled. The blackened ring in the box, it wasn't just an ordinary artifact. It was coated with the dried blood of that vengeful woman, and I had touched it. A wave of regret hit me. I should never have opened that box. That night, I hastily hid the box and tried to sleep, but rest didn't come easily. I woke up in the middle of the night with a sharp, agonizing pain in my stomach. Diana was sleeping soundly next to me. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach that refused to let me rest. Slowly, I got up, careful not to wake her, and made my way to the kitchen to drink some water. I didn't turn on the light, not wanting to disturb the calm of the night. As I stood there, I heard it, a faint whisper, like two people having a hushed conversation. Confused, I froze. The sound seemed to be coming from another room. I placed my glass down and crept quietly toward the source of the whispering. My heart pounded with every step. When I reached the doorway, the sight before me stopped me cold. Diana was in the middle of the room, crouched on all fours, speaking in a low, murmuring tone. My breath caught in my throat. This can't be real, I thought. She was supposed to be asleep in our bed. I had just left her there moments ago. Straining my ears, I caught fragments of what she was saying. "I can't do that. No, I won't." Her voice didn't sound like her own. It was deeper, tinged with something dark and foreign. I must have blacked out at that moment because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in bed, disoriented and unsure of how I got there. Diana was sitting beside me, her face a mix of worry and exhaustion. Her grandmother stood near the foot of the bed, her piercing eyes fixed on me. "What happened?" I asked weakly. "And, Grandma, when did you get here?" Diana answered, "You collapsed in the hall last night. I couldn't wake you, so I called Grandma for help." I turned to her grandmother for confirmation, but instead of addressing my question, she said in a calm but stern tone, "You need to focus on grounding yourself. Stop meddling in things you don't understand." Diana got up and headed to the kitchen to prepare something for me. As soon as she was out of earshot, her grandmother leaned in closer. "You shouldn't have opened that box," she whispered gravely. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't know," I stammered, unable to find the right words. Her next sentence made my blood run cold. Do you think the one in the kitchen is Diana? I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. What are you saying, Grandma? Her expression remained grave, her eyes shadowed with something unspoken, something terrifying. Grandma's voice trembled as she spoke. Diana is possessed, just like her maternal grandmother. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was all too much to process. She won't kill you, not yet, but it won't be long before she does, Grandma continued. I felt my stomach twist in dread. What do you mean? I stammered, still struggling to absorb the words. Grandma's face grew darker. How many days has she been like this, huh? I hesitated, unable to answer immediately. A lot, I muttered, my voice faint. Grandma's eyes hardened as she said, I know, I've been watching. I felt a wave of doubt. How do you know? She replied calmly. In the paper from the box. You read it yourself. My mind raced as she continued. Your wife, like that woman from the past, is slowly poisoning you, and eventually she'll kill you. A chill ran through me. If I hadn't noticed the box was gone, and if I hadn't come here, Diana would have killed you by now, Grandma said, her words laced with urgency. From now on, don't eat anything she gives you. I was stunned, the weight of her words sinking in. Grandma left, and Diana and I were alone. That day, Diana somehow threw everything I had brought her away, acting strange and distant. Despite feeling weak, I decided to visit her grandmother. When I arrived, I asked, How do I solve this? Grandma looked at me solemnly. You opened the door to that box, and Diana became possessed by that cursed soul. The things she does, they're the desires of that spirit. Poor Diana is not guilty, but... I interrupted her, desperate for a solution. Does that mean there's no way to fix this? She sighed deeply. There is a way, but it's difficult. How? I asked, clinging to hope. Grandma explained that to break the curse, I would have to stay away from Diana. The only person who could help was Grandmother, but gaining her trust would be the hardest part. I agreed and left for another city for a year. During that time, I only spoke to Grandma over the phone. Every time I asked about Diana, she told me Diana was fine and improving, but something about her tone made me uneasy. Whenever I asked when I could return, she would say it was still too soon. A year passed, and I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to return to my city. But first, I went to Grandma's house. Grandma wasn't home, and I was filled with a sense of dread. I went to our house next. When I arrived, it was empty, as if no one had lived there for years. I asked the neighbors about Diana, and they told me that after my disappearance, Diana had gone mad, behaving erratically. Her grandmother had taken her to a mental hospital. I went to see Diana, but the staff wouldn't let me in. They told me she had become violent and attacked anyone who came near her. I was lost, devastated. I had lost everything because of a box. Desperate, I searched our house for the box, but it was gone. I went back to Grandma's house hoping for some answers. A woman opened the door, and after a moment she let me in. Grandma was ill, sitting weakly in her chair. The moment she saw me, tears welled up in her eyes. I'm so sorry, she cried. I've done so much harm to you and to Diana. Please forgive me. I stood there numb. What happened, Grandma? Grandma began to confess, her voice weak. Before I married your grandfather, he had a child from his previous marriage. Before he died, he made a will, stating that all his property would go to Diana after her marriage. He decreed that my children would inherit nothing. I was stunned, trying to make sense of her words. So what about that box and the blood ring? Grandma, her breath shallow and labored, replied, It was all a lie. I knew Diana loved you, and I knew your disappearance would break her heart. I was confused and angry, still reeling from the flood of revelations. Where are Diana's parents? I asked. Her parents are saddened by their daughter's problem. Where are they? I am so sorry, Grandma said, her voice trailing off as she weakly reached out towards me. Forgive me, she whispered. A rush of emotions overwhelmed me. I gave her one last lingering look, filled with a mixture of disbelief and bitterness. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of that house. Now I live alone, haunted by what I've learned. Every day, I wait, hoping Diana will recover. I long for the day when I can go to her and make things right.